What? Oh, go
Oh,
ahead.
I just think before we get into the ground
Hmm.
assault, I think someone would mention we this the dry cask storage isn't these casks aren't stored inside the same area where the fuel pool is. They're
Right.
they're stored outside. So I think someone would say, well, like, okay, well, that's fine about the fuel pool. What about the dry cask
Right.
storage
Right. So that's outside of the plant, generally stored
outside the
on
plant?
on the
So yeah,
property.
so like, okay, now imagine maybe a plane crashing into one of those.
Hmm.
Now I don't think they've done the plane crashing into the cask, but I think when we'll post links to these
Hmm.
videos, they've shot missiles at the casks.
Literal
They've
missiles. Yeah.
literal
Yeah.
missiles. They have crashed trains into the sides of the casks going at very high speeds,
Like
and they have
T-boning.
crashed
Yeah.
T-boning effectively these casks. They've crashed the casks on these on you know some kind basically trying to break these casks. And in all these cases, they've set them on fire. Basically, all these tests have shown these are extremely robust, and the odds that you would crash a giant plane and it would penetrate these casks and release radiation to the environment is just so low. It's really it just seems
It's kind of
not.
silly to me. It's like,
It's also silly. I mean, it's funny that like this terrorist thing like jumped out to you,
hmm,
to me, because like when someone said that, I'm like, oh, like you're just kind of silly. Like you haven't thought about this. Like most people, I mean,
yeah, most
people have
people
thought
haven't,
about this.
right? I mean, well, I
Most
mean,
people
I
haven't.
guess the public hasn't really. I had never sat down to figure out, oh, well, how feasible is that, you know?
Yeah, and I think to me, I just like, oh yeah, like that's just something some guy who hasn't really researched this or thought about it too much would say.
Right.
Um,
So yeah, I mean, I think
but
it's important to say like, yeah, they have thought about this and it is very safe from those kind of things. And yeah, I think we should definitely post those videos because they are pretty incredible.
and they're just cool to see. I mean, you see these things are really robust. You see like the train getting smushed, these trucks that they're driving, these casts on get just destroyed,
Like
and these casts, I mean,
the
you know,
entire
yeah,
semi truck crumples, but the cask is like
it's
almost perfectly
damaged,
fine. Yeah, I mean
but
it is that it
it is
shows some
not
damage,
penetrated.
but oh yeah,
Yeah,
no, it
it is.
wasn't it
Yeah,
wasn't compromised.
yeah,
So
and I would say potentially there's some cracks, right?
mhm.
And at this point, but that's not like a large release of radiation to the public,
Right. So still
right?
not
Like there's
really a
still
great
like even if
terrorist
there's a big
target.
crack, it's yeah, right. It's like what did that actually do?
Right.
Did that, let's just say it released some fission gases outside. Okay, that maybe is equivalent to something that happened at 3 Mile Island, which is effectively like getting uh, roughly around an X-ray or a couple of dental X-rays. Anyway, I think we've covered just
Well, we've definitely covered the
attacking.
plane. I would like to cover
Right.
the ground
Yeah.
assault thing real quick, just because
Oh
I
yeah.
didn't realize how heavy these things were. So I think if somebody says, well, terrorists could get a plane and crash it into the fuel, okay, we just refuted. They really can't. Probably not going to happen. Like it that is not a likely thing to happen. So the other thing they could say is, okay, well, what if they had some sort of ground assault force, special ops, whatever, to get these things? Well, as
And well, so these things meaning stealing the dry cask
mhm.
or stealing a fuel assembly from directly out of the reactor or from the fuel pool. So I think
Right,
fuel,
I
like basically
guess,
stealing
yeah.
it and removing it for some kind of nefarious purpose off-site.
Right. So I was picturing more just the dry cask because it is
It is
external outside
outside,
of the
so that so
facility.
so, so that might be present an easier target at least
Or you
initially.
would think, but as we mentioned, these things weigh hundreds of thousands of pounds. Now, for a little reference, the maximum load of most, well, actually, of the highest rated semi trucks is like 80,000 pounds. So we're talking 2 to 3 times or 4 times more heavy than that. Um, if you've never done any, or if you've never been around any trucking kind of things, like that is an insane amount of weight that most roads and definitely most bridges would not be able to hold up to. So I guess what people would say is, okay, some spec ops people get in there, they somehow get this cask up and onto a truck, and they zoom out of
Okay,
there.
yeah,
There's
yeah, and
physically no way that can happen.
right. So I think you you harped on just the weight of it
Hmm.
and just the truck necessary. So it's not just a semi truck that they just like park like a storage container off of a dock, put onto a semi truck.
Right.
It's not a normal semi truck. It's a specialized semi truck that is not located at the facility at all the times. It's these trucks aren't just like waiting around at these nuclear facilities. They're actually usually the contractors who help with the dry casks have the trucks. It's like the
Gotcha.
trucks aren't at the facility, so you'd have to get the truck or time it such that you're doing this attack when the trucks are at the plant.
Which is probably the most secure time of, the
It's a
entire
more it's
reactor.
yeah, I mean it's heightened. Yeah, I mean
Heightened
there's more
security,
people
yeah.
on site. Their security's a bit heightened. But yeah, so like it's not like a normal truck. Normal truck won't do it, as Nick mentioned, just the weight limit. And these are specialized trucks,
And then
and they
let's say
also
they get
yeah.
the truck, Zaner, how quick
Let's
can
say
they
they get the
go?
truck. Okay, yeah, they get the truck, and then
Somehow.
somehow they get the truck, and then what do they do with it? Where
Well,
do they drive it
well,
to?
I was just gonna say they're extremely slow. Like they're not like normal trucks that you load them up and then you can go 55 down the highway. They are specialized trucks that do not go very fast at all. Like generally within walking pace. Would you say?
Well, the people I know at nuclear facilities haven't seen these being moved at faster than walking pace. Right? I mean, you just think about the the brakes you need to stop something like this. I mean,
Right.
they just don't go quickly because they don't. It's hard to get them up to speed, hard to slow them down. So these things, you're not making a fast escape.
Right. It's not like Fast and the Furious, like tearing down the highway with one of these things on the back of the truck.
Right. That's my understanding. Is the you'd have to very carefully plan the route to avoid certain roads and bridges. I think okay, most plausible way to do it would be a site where you have access to a large waterway quickly.
Mm,
So you'd have to, load it from the truck onto a barge or boat.
gotcha. And that would get
Again,
it off
having
site.
all the capabilities to move a extremely heavy object carefully onto this boat or barge. You know,
Logistically, pretty tough to do.
so just logistically, at the same time, you have every single federal agency,
Right. Right.
breathing
Right.
down your neck as you're trying to hold on. Let me like if you ever watch people move these things around, like there's several engineers, technicians, looking at it, moving it, all these things, all the movements of these happen so slowly because it's super heavy.
Hmm.
It's just like you're not just throwing it around. This isn't, it's not like a simple crane you can just move it around. So I think we've kind of exhausted to the point where it's probably semi annoying that these things are heavy and hard to move.
Right. So really we've refuted step A. So we could just stop there, but we're not going to. So if they and so we're going to go back to the evil genius scenario here. So if they were to get one of these dry casks, let's say they would need the step B, next step is to process the fuel. Now, again, we've really refuted that they're not going to get this and they're not going to be able to do this, but I think it's important to say just for those people out there that want to argue about every little thing. So, really, we've kind of got it down to two scenarios for that as well for processing the fuel. They'd either need to do it at the site, which would take, at the nuclear reactor site, which would take a
Yeah.
ground assault and be able to hold out long enough to actually process this fuel. I don't know much about military operations, but I can tell you that is not going to happen. Like it is physically impossible that terrorists could take over a nuclear fuel facility and keep it and hold it long enough to do anything with anything in there. Like it's just
Yeah.
not going to happen. I can,
Right.
it's just not. So the
Right.
second would be off-site somewhere, which means that you, evil genius, would have to have a government level nuclear research facility somewhere in the United States that has not only evaded the notice of all these different agencies, but has these highly specialized vehicles and tools and cranes and all this stuff.
And a lot of all and that stuff is all controlled.
Hmm.
All like you can't just buy. For instance, you need to store this. You need to work with this fuel, which is highly radioactive, in a contained way. You need a large glove box. and those you can't just go and make a purchase order for those. Like all that stuff is monitored. All the supply chain for nuclear. The stuff to do this is all the supply chain is watched
Gotcha.
as well. So assembling this lab, that's a whole other topic. Like,
Right,
could you
right.
assemble a nuclear lab in the United States
Without
for
anyone
this kind of
noticing.
purpose without anyone noticing?
Yeah,
I
pretty
think that
pretty
would
hard.
be a giant undertaking in itself.
Right.
Somewhere else, across the sea,
Well, but let's
somewhere else,
let's focus on the
maybe
United
slightly
States.
possible, but let's just focus on the United
Right,
States.
because
Yeah.
we have a kind of a refutation of that at the end too. Um, so essentially, the terrorists cannot get the fuel, which is step one, by either scenario that we've been able to figure out. Step two is also nearly impossible at site, off site, and then if they were to get an off site facility, it's still almost impossible to work with, again, without these government funded uh, programs. So,
Shoot, if people have thought, if some kind of group has thought of a way to do this very cheaply and quickly, then I think they would make, people would be very interested to know that and could probably do, it's just reprocessing nuclear fuel. Okay, so we should also mention one thing
mhm,
here. We're talking about reprocessing nuclear fuel for the potential of extracting some of the material to either make enough uh, fissile material to make a bomb. I think the simpler one would be to process the material and remove some of the nuclear fuel to make a dirty bomb out of it.
right, right.
So I think making the dirty bomb is the more likely scenario, if at all possible.
Which
Again, you still have to hold on to all this highly radioactive material and transport it somewhere,
and then work with
which
it
I think is kind of
safely,
what we're gonna and work with it safely.
right? Because all of your engineers that you've paid to do all this crazy stuff that wouldn't happen in the real world would then get irradiated immediately and die once they, if they didn't have everything buttoned up perfectly. So that would be
Correct.
kind of a
Yeah.
bummer. So because the to actually do like a fusion bomb is really, I mean, impossible, right? For a terrorist organization, if they were to get through all these other processes that we've completely repudiated, building an actual nuclear bomb is its own thing in itself, right?
Oh, right. Well, that would be the reprocessing. What
Mm.
they would want to do. So to make the fission bomb,
Hmm.
they would want to extract something that is fissionable in high enough concentrations that it can actually make an uncontrolled fission event happen. And they would have to basically chemically separate the plutonium out. I would imagine plutonium would be the easiest like fission bomb to
Hmm.
make. So they'd want to extract a bunch of plutonium out as much as they could, and they'd have to do that for several fuel assemblies,
Oh,
and then
interesting. So it
make
would
the
take
bomb out of
several of
that.
those 300,000 pound
Yeah,
things. Like,
I believe so. I think we could look up. Let's see.
well, I
I
mean,
actually
it's
don't.
not even that.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure how many tons of fissile plutonium like 239 you would need to make a bomb.
Uh-huh.
Um, but you wouldn't. It's a fraction. It's a small fraction that's actually produced in the spent nuclear fuel assembly.
Gotcha. So that's
And there's also
another.
several types of plutonium,
Mm,
and I actually don't know all the details of you know you'd have to reprocess it and then separate it all out. And I'm actually not entirely sure how feasible it is to separate all of the different isotopes from of plutonium out, so you only have the isotopes you want, and everything like that to actually make a bomb like this.
right.
My
So,
understanding is
oh,
it's generally not possible. There's so many different, it's very nuanced too. All these different isotopes. They're all, uranium, plutonium. They all sound the same, but the different isotopes are actually complicate making a weapon from the nuclear fuel.
gotcha. And I think it should be maybe pointed out too that weapons development for nuclear weapons and the power are really separate industries almost. I mean, would you
Yeah,
say that?
yeah. I mean, yeah. I mean, you can't even take. I mean, if let's just take fresh nuclear fuel. You can't take that kind of uranium and make a bomb. I mean, most people have some idea of this enrichment process, but the enrichment of the uranium, the amount of uranium 235 um, in this fuel isn't enough. It's not enriched enough to make a weapon.
Gotcha. So if they wanted to make a true nuclear bomb, we'd need to add another step of reprocessing the fuel to.
Reprocessing and yeah, basically being able to make high enriched uranium, or enough extracting enough plutonium to then make a bomb.
Gotcha. So I think it's safe to say that they're not going to be able to build a nuclear bomb with,
Spent nuclear
yeah,
fuel.
spent
Yeah,
nuclear fuel,
that's
or even it sounds like regular nuclear fuel,
correct.
before it's been used. So I think we can kind of put that aside. So the second thing would be like a dirty bomb, right? A
Right.
chemical
I think that's like
explosive.
the real.
Okay. Oh, yeah.
Right.
Sorry. So
Okay.
just to set
Yeah.
it up real quick, a dirty bomb would be like a chemical explosive. So like a conventional, type of bomb with some of this nuclear material attached in some way, and it would most likely be, Bill says later in the episode, it would most likely be, some sort of powder form, or some very very small particles, that would be extremely radioactive and cause cancer. So I think that the more likely scenario is that they, and again, it's not likely at all because we've refuted all these steps up until now, but let's say they could do it. um, it's more likely that they would do some sort of dirty bomb thing, not a true nuclear bomb.
Right.
Okay, so to make a dirty bomb, you would need to have a conventional explosive, which in itself would be, I'm assuming, I don't know anything about this, but I'm assuming it would be fairly hard to make a large conventional explosive large enough to, spread the kind of devastation that they would want to in this, right? I mean, that it would have to be a fairly large bomb to coat any, major metropolitan area in this, in these particles, right? I mean, I'm just assuming.
Yeah. I'm not sure I'm willing to really make that concrete of a conclusion,
Hmm.
but yeah, I really am not sure. I think I think you can make a dirty bomb with nuclear material. It's definitely I I don't have a clear knowledge of or
Gotcha. So
you know
let's say
sense of
that
that.
it is, because we don't know, we're not experts on conventional explosives. So let's say it is physically possible to make a conventional bomb with dirty components that is shielded enough not to kill the pilot, first of all. Or maybe, if we're going to go evil genius, maybe they have some sort of remote control, um, you know, flying
Well,
mechanism.
or you just assume that the people flying the plane are okay with dying in the explosion,
Well, that's
right?
true. I wasn't sure how quickly the radioactive material would like kill them on the flight, though.
Yeah, it would. They would need. You definitely would want some shielding. I don't think unless they're in direct contact with it would they receive a dose to cause like in a
Instant death kind of thing. Like they could
yeah, or
probably
like
hold on
like
long enough to.
yeah. I think they would probably before they showed like symptoms of acute radiation sickness. Yeah,
Gotcha. Okay,
just
so
my guess. Unless they're like holding it.
gotcha. So after all these steps that we have refuted, they get a plane and, make the conventional bomb, somehow process this fuel to make the dirty component of it, and, explode it over a major metropolitan area, let's say. I suppose in the, just to be fair, that is hypothetically possible, but all of these steps that it would take to get there, it's going to get shut down long before this is ever going to happen. So I guess it is a feasible thing to happen if the conditions were such that they had this dirty bomb material already, and were somehow able to make this explosive and make it big enough to
Right.
coat, a major metropolitan area. Um,
Right.
Again, probably not very likely because of all the steps that they would have to take to get there. So I guess the plane is probably the weakest link in this scenario here. It seems to me anyway.
And then I guess right if it's a large stealing a commercial plane, you either would have to bring the material on, which I think most people agree that's going to be really ridiculous, or have a private plane that you're loading it on beforehand, or steal a commercial plane, land it, re put it put the bomb on, then like take off again,
That's
which
what
I
I was
think
kind
is
of picturing, because I would just assume,
which
again, I
sounds
don't
like the
know.
most insane. That's the most insane way.
Right,
But
exactly.
I think the private plane route, right?
Right, yeah. So I mentioned, like, is a conventional bomb big enough to do this kind of damage, small enough to also put in a private plane? We don't know.
Right. That's a good question.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good
You know,
question.
we don't personally have that information, but I'm really not concerned about that because of all the steps prior that we've just listed off. So, and you know, there are security measures for private planes as well, and especially the smaller airports I happen to know. You know, those are more like neighbors that know each other rather than commercial pilots that are just coming and going all day long. Um, not always, I'm not going to say every small airport is like that, but frequently they are. They're hobbyists that have these small planes or that kind of thing. So it's maybe they don't have the oh, hold on, my cat's food is going. Hold on, sorry.
Yeah. Okay.
Here, while I'm just talking to you real quick. So I guess like the weakest point in the equation is like a private plane that was you
Right.
know
Which yeah. Again, it's still like that's kind of decoupled from the actual nuclear security concerns. Like
right,
that's a
right.
problem if like regardless.
Yeah, right. That's true. I mean, as somebody, I mentioned Xander, that a guy stole a private plane up in the Seattle area a couple of years ago. I don't even remember when it was, and he was able to. He didn't do any damage with it. Well, he killed himself, but he didn't. He wasn't a terrorist trying to hurt other people. He was really just trying to commit suicide in a showy way, I think. Um, so yeah, I guess that the private plane thing is its own security issue. I'm not that concerned about it because you could always grab a Cessna and fly it into the top of the Empire State Building, let's say, and the debris from that is going to, you know, be a be a large issue as well. Like, yeah, maybe it doesn't have nuclear, substances in it, but we've seen people die from the 9/11 attacks just inhaling all that dust. Depending on what building it is, it might be asbestos. All these things. Like, it seems like that would be a much easier, quicker, more impactful and doable terrorist attack than anything we've mentioned previously. So I
Right.
think I'm fine with saying that I'm not that concerned about a plane. Um, and then really
Yeah.
the
And I
oh,
think the
go ahead.
large Oh, I was going to say, I mean, to me just the large takeaway and why we spend so much time on this is just it's very frustrating when there's so many potential nuclear excuse me, potential terrorist targets that nuclear gets brought up right away as being a large one and a cause for concern and more fear surrounding nuclear power.
Right,
It seems like it's part of a larger agenda against this, nuclear power.
right, right. Um, yeah, for sure. Um, and then really the only other system that we could think of would be some kind of missile. And again, if you've got a missile, we've got bigger problems than terrorists, taking years to get enough material in the United States for a dirty bomb. Like I guess if a terrorist has a missile in the United States, we're fucked. So
Oops.
I'm not really that concerned about the individual power plants out there being, taken over to get this slightly more devastating material, being nuclear material, to cause an even more devastating thing than like a missile does. Like I think that if you have a missile, go ahead and just shoot it off into a major metropolitan area. I think that would do, you know, just as much damage as if you put some dirty bomb material on the end of
Well,
it.
and there's other chemicals. There's other things besides radioactive material that will leave a lasting impact. A dirty bomb with other, chemicals
Oh, that yeah.
that
Well, yeah, that's true.
right. So there's and those facilities are much lower targets. So if you just think about like again, risk versus reward versus like damage caused,
Hmm.
like why would you go after make this as hard the hardest scenario possible is getting into the nuclear facility and stealing the fuel and dealing with it. Why not just hypothetically get into a facility with much,
Like
with
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 arsenic or something,
harmful
or
material.
or
Yeah, stuff that you can get much easier.
right, and
Um,
and work with it much easier, and still have a very
right,
devastating effect. Yeah, it just really
right.
doesn't make a lot of sense from, it's kind of to say, but it
Oops.
doesn't make a lot of sense from a terrorist point of view to go through all these things to make arguably slightly more devastating weapon, you know.
Right.
So I think
Right.
to sum this up real quick, you know, we've refuted the processes that it would take to get there within the United States. So we're focusing on nuclear security kind of here in the United States. You know, Xander made a good point to say that the you know, plane security is kind of its own thing. We don't, you know, we're not really talking about TSA and plane security. We're talking about nuclear security. So why would a terrorist organization want to do all of this in the United States when there are hostile actors in the world that would be more than happy to give a terrorist organization this material, and they wouldn't have to go through all of this extremely arduous process within the United States? Like, it just doesn't make a lot of sense to me that they would go through all this to do that when they could go through another country to get the same material. Just doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
So I guess, you know, maybe that's like the final sum up point. Like, if they really wanted to do some sort of nuclear attack,
Yeah, I
they
think so.
wouldn't
And I
do it
just,
from within the
again, I
United
just think
States.
this
It's
is
just too hard.
people espousing fear about nuclear, and that's really quite unfounded. And in reality, given all the concerns around nuclear and terrorism, it's actually one of the more studied scenarios.
Hmm.
So it's sort of like the thing you're worrying, about the most, um, is sort of, it's like, yeah, just very silly
Yeah, it's the least
in
likely
most
to
ways.
happen and hardest to do. And yeah, I mean, we just spent 45 minutes explaining why it's not going to happen. So I think we're
Yeah,
good. You know.
yeah, I think just right. Yep, I think we're good. In this episode, Bill, goes through, makes these kind of cute little segments, and it's kind of going to summarize a couple of them and just kind of talk about some stuff in each. So basically, there's these three things that flash across the screen: cheap nuclear, cheap nuclear power, miracle drugs, spaceships to the moon, and this character, the Atom, says, "I never promised it. All those were made up lies by the media to get people into nuclear power." Okay, like all these things, and he says, "Oh, those aren't true. Those didn't happen." Um, they all did, and not in the phrasing of miracle drug. So let's kind of break these down real quick. Nuclear power has been cheap and affordable and made economic sense, especially in the 1970s. We can get into nuclear power economics at some point, but it has been cheap. You can look at it, levelized cost of electricity. This is true. Miracle drugs. Okay, look at cancer treatment using radioisotopes. This is using nuclear technology. And in fact, there's work going on right now. I know people who are doing this who are taking actually spent material from nuclear weapons production and extracting isotopes out of that are really, really good at treating cancer. Like so miracle drugs has been, cancer treatment has been done with nuclear technology and is going to be done directly from nuclear material, from weapons, basically isotopes from this that have been sitting around forever, last 60 years, are going to be extracted and used to treat people for cancer because there's very special isotopes that are produced that are very, very helpful for treating cancer. You can look it up. It's called targeted alpha therapy. And this is, not science fiction. This is real. So miracle drugs, spaceships to the moon. Now, we haven't used a nuclear powered spaceship to get to the moon, but we've actually used nuclear power, um, radioactive sources to power our deepest space missions. Look at the Voyager missions. The Voyager missions used a radioactive source of, I believe it was plutonium. I have to double check, but it's a radioactive source that's very hot, and a thermoelectric generator that basically takes a temperature difference and makes electricity. And in this case, it used the cold part of space and the hot part of this nuclear
Oh
material
wow.
to literally power our deepest space missions.
But damn, I didn't know that.
Um, yeah.
Huh.
So I mean, spaceships to the moon. It's actually, these are spaceships that have gone farther than the moon. These are
Right.
our deepest space missions. These are missions where and in the future, I think most, if you look at the budget for 2020, there's more money being put towards, and this has been researched before, but for nuclear powered
Hmm.
rockets and things like that, because I think we're hitting the limit of chemical powered rockets. And just if you look at the energy density of nuclear fuel, it's going to have to be in some way used for any kind of deep long term space mission.
Right.
So spaceships, I think we've kind of, I, you know, Again, kind of nitpicky, but he says all these things are false, and all of them have happened. I just really like to refute these because this sort of flashed across the screen like, oh, nuclear power made all these promises, haven't delivered on any. Like total
Right.
nonsense. Lots of amazing things have happened that get almost no credibility,
Gotcha.
or no credit. Excuse
Right.
me. From about 8 minutes in to about 9 minutes and 6 seconds, Bill goes through and describes radiation very quickly. He says, radiation, microwaves, light, it's all radiation. Then he goes and the screen gets all green and like and
Oops.
scary. Ionizing radiation is produced in a nuclear facility. He says this is dangerous. This kills people and causes cancer. Doesn't describe all the numerous. There's different kinds of ionizing radiation. They have different properties. And he says, oh, pieces of paper, they can stop radiation like light, but they can't stop ionizing radiation. 100% false.
Hmm.
100%. Like this is, you can do this experiment, and we'll post a video of a guy doing this experiment. So he doesn't describe all of the types of ionizing radiation because he probably doesn't even know. So, for instance, not all ionizing radiation, but alpha particles indeed can be stopped by something as small as a piece of paper. So it's just verifiably wrong. He says pieces of paper are not able to do it. He makes an exclamation after this. Not true. Some ionizing radiation can be stopped with a piece of paper.
Hmm.
And this just goes to show these issues are complex. He doesn't understand them, and there's nuance. And you can't, in these statements, it's just wrong.
Gotcha.
Just wrong.
And I would just like to say, I think it's good to point out that, yeah, they are full of nuance and, these are really complex topics. And, I myself definitely am not claiming to be any kind of expert in any of this stuff. I'm just curious. I want to know what's going to work best for the planet. I want to work, what's cheapest, blah, blah, blah. I'm just curious about this stuff. So, I can't even remember where I was going to go with that, but basically, I'm not an expert. Xander isn't an expert in all aspects of nuclear technology because it's no one could be really, right? I mean, the nuclear field is so vast. There's no one who knows everything about nuclear, right?
I mean, right. There's numerous areas. It's a huge topic.
Right.
Yeah.
So I mean, we're not claiming to be the all-seeing eye of truth in this matter, but we would like to point out where Bill in this case is extremely factually wrong, and
this isn't like a topic that any science, this isn't like a controversial topic that alpha particles can be stopped by something like your skin or a piece of paper.
Mm-hmm.
This is true. You can do an experiment. This is not controversial. This isn't like at all, like 0%.
Gotcha.
So it's just like totally like, did you do any research like this? It's just frustrating,
Gotcha.
So
yeah, I mean, I just want to make it clear, I'm not trying to, go toe to toe with Bill on all this stuff. I'm just curious. I want to know what's true and what's not, and I think we've heard on this podcast the many times that Bill has said untrue things, and I think that is my biggest kind of gripe with him. I'm not a scientist either, but the fact that he gets that title really pisses me off. So,
yeah.
Okay. Do you have some more clips that you want to mention, or?
I don't know if we want to go into. I'll just kind of quickly,
Like
right after 9:15 to about 10 minutes. This again, like super cringeworthy, supposed to be funny, like 50s portrayal nuclear scientist or teacher, just basically like lying to kids like about nuclear, like the kid saying that he's a liar, and then him like saying, "Oh yeah, I was a liar." There's like two kids, and one of them like they question him about nuclear power and its safety, and he goes, "Oh no, it's fine, it's fine." And like one of the kids leaves, and the other one's like, "Oh no, I'm just making that up. Like it is dangerous." So it's just this sort of like portrayal as like nuclear scientists as these old white men just lying to people, like lying to little kids. It's just sort of like, again, this like narrative, like not being objective and having this narrative like nuclear power is dangerous and scary, and I'm going to reinforce that with every single like emotional appeal that I can of like black and white 50s guy lying to kids, like, oh man, like this, yeah, like man, those guys are all that creates an image in your head and sort of again makes this narrative seem much worse than it
Yeah,
is.
for sure. I don't think people, the average person, has done really probably any research into any of this stuff. So, seeing something on PBS back in the day, not now, but seeing something on PBS and, it's Bill Nye, who you've heard is the science guy, like, why would you feel like you needed to do any more research into this topic at the time?
Right,
Now
right.
it's pretty clear that we do need to,
And
like,
yeah.
question him, but.
Well, yeah, and you just break it down, you just see this like clear emotional appeal to like make it seem like nuclear scientists are also liars.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Right.
So, I that one's like personally frustrating. Like, okay, like man,
Yeah, that's like
that's
personal attack versus like a coherent argument, I mean,
yeah, it's just like yeah, it's
yeah,
goofy.
that's not
So,
cool. Okay,
yeah.
any more things you just want to mention?
I mean, there's just, I think now we kind of are at the point where he's getting into the storage and the Yucca Mountain
Okay.
stuff. So, I mean, from about 10 minutes and 30 seconds to 14 minutes, 10 seconds, he talks about Yucca Mountain. And I don't think we need to play any of this, really.
No, I didn't want to play anything from Yucca Mountain, honestly.
But I think we can, people can listen to this part and they can, we'll just kind of mention a couple things. Um, you know, Yucca Mountain,
See, can
he's
I
like,
can
oh,
I break
Yucca.
in real quick?
Oh, yeah, please.
I
Yeah,
don't
yeah,
think we
yeah,
even
break
need to
it.
go into Yucca Mountain, honestly, because to me, I think we should just say, from this time to this time, Bill talks about Yucca Mountain. He goes to Yucca Mountain and talks to some engineers, blah blah blah. We're not going to get into the Yucca Mountain issue because it's turned into a political issue and not a science issue at this point. Like, do you think that's fair to say?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a lot of politics around it, and I think he harps on this issue. Um, you know, I
Well,
think
to
I
me, it's
just
kind of like if
yeah
it's not Yucca Mountain, then we'll find another place. Like, it doesn't really matter that Yucca Mountain specifically, to me anyway.
yeah yeah yeah. I guess I just wanted to mention a couple of things
Hmm.
in this whole discussion that he has. Is he says, well, it's 100 miles from Las Vegas. That's like hard to keep away from people. What's not mentioned even by the scientists that he interviews is that the Nevada test site is right across, like even you know, just as maybe a little bit farther, a couple miles farther from Yucca Mountain. Like on the other side, north of Yucca Mountain, is the Nevada test site where nuclear bombs were tested with no shielding, and they're just, all that is in the ground. So like that's just effectively as close to these large population centers and isn't contained at all. So that's also in part why Yucca Mountain makes some sense, right? Like there's already this area that's controlled and has a ton of
Oh, I
much
see.
more concerning radioactive substances right over there. I mean, right after this Yucca Mountain discussion, starting at well, the first time is 14 minutes to 15 minutes and 48 seconds. He interviews Dan Hirsch, credentials, president, the Committee to Bridge the Gap.
Whatever that is.
Right. Well, and what that is a it's a lobbying organization. They lobby against nuclear power. He brings up a lot of those discussions of the water
Hmm.
table and um, all of these claims about the Nuclear Regulatory Commission saying X, Y, and Z, and X, Y, and Z being true or false.
Hmm.
So like refuting everything he says, he doesn't. There's no citations for anything he says.
Oh,
Um,
right, yeah.
so it's sort of hard. Like if you look through it, he says, "Oh, the NRC found out there's actually lots of moisture at Yucca Mountain. Um, the 10,000 year mark is based on they thought 11,000 years was how long those canisters will be stored." And he also says plutonium's the most dangerous thing we have ever found.
Well, ever
That's
created,
that's
right?
also his ever created by humans. That's his claim because a small amount of it can cause lung cancer. That's his basic claim. Like if you spread out a lot of uranium, a lot of plutonium, that will kill a lot of people.
Hmm.
That's his basic argument. And I think this whole claim, I mean, plutonium is dangerous. It sort of just goes around, sort of gets around like how would you get all this plutonium powder and disperse all of it into a large population?
Hmm.
That's sort of the thing. There's lots of things, anthrax, other biological weapons. If you were to get a hold of them and disperse them into a large population center, it would be devastating. No
Right,
way around that.
right. So I mean, does that
And
does
this
that go back to our first discussion about the terrorist thing, or?
Well, yeah, a little bit. I think it's also this like correlating plutonium with commercial nuclear fuel is just like this fundamental like annoyance. They keep bringing it up. It's like, okay, plutonium is produced in nuclear fuel. It is also consumed in nuclear fuel. So like
Hmm.
what's fun and complicated about nuclear reactors is everything's changing all the time. So like uranium gets transmuted into plutonium, but that plutonium is actually a really good fuel source. Like plutonium can fuel a reactor if you wanted it to. It's actually good. So but a lot of as it's produced, a lot of it is burned
Hmm.
and used up kind of like as it's going. So
I think you bring up a good point because that is part of the difficulty in understanding these topics because there's a bunch of different kinds of reactors. There's a bunch of different cooling methods. There's a bunch of different fuels and isotopes that are created or used or
mm-hmm.
produced and end up in the fuel afterwards. So it's I think it is fairly uh, I can understand why most people don't have like a really good idea of what goes on in a nuclear reactor because they're it's a complex topic. So I don't fault the average person on this topic, but I do fault the people who are gonna go on national TV and say all these unfounded things like you just said without
Right.
citations as you just said as well.
Right. So I think, responding to everything he claims is challenging, but plutonium, the most dangerous thing we have conceived of, is just sort of conjecture. I mean, he's just sort of throwing it out there, like without any real like the evidence to support that.
Well, yeah, I
You
mean, you
know.
could make the argument that gunpowder was the most dangerous thing. I guarantee you. In fact,
Well,
I
right.
know for 100% certain that firearms and you know gunpowder as a result have killed. Yeah, I don't even know what the factor is above what nuclear power or probably weapons actually too have killed.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure.
Like,
Yeah, no doubt plutonium is dangerous, but this like correlation again with commercial nuclear facilities is really really silly. There are small amounts of plutonium left in spent nuclear fuel, but it's not like that is just out there easy to take and disperse.
gotcha, gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. Um. Well, okay. So, do you want to talk about long-term storage at all, or because I think that is a that's a complex topic too, of course, and it would be good to do a whole episode just on nuclear fuel. So I'm not sure how far you want to get into it, on this one,
Yeah.
but the fact that work is being done to use to reprocess used fuel into other reactors, meaning that we wouldn't have all of this material just sitting around and we wouldn't need long-term storage because we can use it for other things is the ideal. It's not in practice yet. It's not commercially viable, but just like any other technology thing, as the technology gets better, it'll get cheaper and more cost effective, and maybe that's the solution. Do you agree or no?
Yeah, I mean, I think, in the United States, we don't do any reprocessing of used nuclear fuel, but it is done outside of the US in Europe, and I believe in Japan they have some policies, and Russia and China. They can actually reprocess the nuclear fuel, and actually, in the end, you're getting power from it, and also reducing the amount of long-term uh, fuel that's radioactive for a longer amount of time.
Gotcha.
So this is possible. This technology exists, and you can reprocess nuclear fuel. We have what's called a once through fuel cycle where we just use it and then store it. In these other places, they are using their nuclear fuel and then reprocessing it and then using it again. So it's effectively recycling. This technology
Right.
exists, and we'll actually put a overview of nuclear fuel reprocessing in an article. You also, hypothetically can do even more reprocessing and burning of some of these longer lived fission products. These parts of the fuel that are radioactive for a long time, you can you know burn them effectively in a certain types of reactors that'll actually they'll go away
Hmm.
in these reactors and produce power. So these technical possibilities. These solutions are possible, and he spends all this time talking about Yucca Mountain in long-term storage while spending a very small amount of time on um, advanced reactor technology, which at the time I guess wasn't quite as much of an interest as it is now, almost 15 years later.
Yeah, I mean, we could
So
maybe excuse him for not being up on the latest technology for reprocessing the fuel and different types of reactors, yada yada. Um, but his kind of long-term storage is his main scare tactic towards the end of the video. So I think it is, important to point out that yeah, we are developing technologies that can reduce the half-lives of these materials, that can make them go away, even like totally consume them. All
yeah,
these engineering things that we're coming out with. I think it's pretty. I think it's pretty short-sighted, and I don't think it's very scientific to say that we have this problem right now. Um, I can't. Bill saying I can't think of a solution, so therefore we shouldn't do it.
Nuclear power offered great promise. It was created by geniuses, but there are no genius trash collectors picking up after them. Right now, the nuclear waste problem has no solution. Yucca Mountain is fraught with difficulties. The state of Nevada is doing all it can to stop it. See, nuclear waste has been sitting out there all over the world for decades. But remember, we're talking about plutonium and very concentrated uranium. This stuff is deadly on a scale that's hard to imagine. You have to wonder, has anyone really stopped to think what 10,000 or 30,000 or 300,000 years really means? No civilization in history has lasted a tenth of the half-life of this material. And until the waste problem is solved, for real, nuclear power doesn't do us any good. Future generations, 100 or 200 years from now, our descendants, are going to be furious with us. So solve the waste problem or shut the reactors down. Now, you're a voter or a taxpayer. Make them get it done. That's the way I see it. And I'll see you next time on The Eyes of Nye.
until waste is solved, nuclear power doesn't do us any good. That's his final statement, and that's really
Jesus
really the
Christ.
biggest, and it's really the biggest issue I have
Yeah.
because okay, so saying nuclear power doesn't do us any good because it produces waste, uh, it's
Well,
just
to me,
it
as a
seems just to
layperson
me
too,
extremely short-sighted.
the fact that we don't have any way of reducing, as an example, burning of fossil fuels, we don't have any way of storing that either, right? That just
Yeah,
goes
no,
into the
I mean, yeah,
atmosphere at rates that we don't even know because a lot of countries don't report that kind of stuff. So we're spewing all of these heavy metals and carbon and all the stuff into the atmosphere. So the fact that he wouldn't bring that up and just say, you know, we can't use this nuclear technology until we have a way to fully and completely figure out what to do with the spent fuel, I think is just disingenuous and frankly dumb. Like
yeah.
it doesn't make a lot of sense. We are containing it, we are storing it. Can you give us how much spent fuel is there in the world,
I believe it's around 300,000 tons,
which would
and
fit on?
well, in the United States, I think it's around it's a fraction of that. We have produced the most energy from nuclear power, but my understanding is if you take all of the nuclear fuel, all the spent fuel that's been used for the entire, let's see, since 1957,
70s,
70
70-ish years,
years, of power, all of it you could lay it on a football field and it would stack up about 3 meters high.
yeah. Okay, now if we took, and I don't know this for certain, maybe we can go back and look at this, but if we took all of the carbon emissions from that same time period and compressed them into a box, I don't think that it would fit on a football field.
I am 100% sure that it would not fit on a football field. Well,
Right,
it's not contained.
right,
I mean,
right,
that's the thing. Nuclear powered, the fuel is a cause for concern. There's no doubt. It needs to be careful. With a lot of thought. But it is contained. That's to me, it's contained and it's easy to detect. Those are actually good features of it.
hmm
Is it comes out and it's contained and we know if it's left. Whereas these other sources, it's carbon into the atmosphere. Who knows? Someone else's problem at that point.
right.
Like all these, nuclear basically is held to a much higher standard and actually is thought about long-term consequences, unlike any other industry. You can take things like solar panels produced, lots of uh, lithium and other metals need to be mined. What's the life cycle of that? What's the plan for decommissioning that? These things aren't factored into the cost of these facilities.
Hmm.
How long do they last for?
Wind
How
turbines
do
are
you
famously pretty inefficient for long-term energy production. They last, but and this is just a little research I've done. They last about 10 years, and there is still no currently. Uh, there is still no way to recycle all the components of a modern wind turbine. They have not figured that out yet.
Yeah, so all of these sources, I think solar and wind should be used as much as possible. It should be.
Yeah,
But they should also be have these life cycle, these so-called sustainability questions answered at a similar level, to like nuclear facilities and carbon capture at coal facilities and stuff like that. Those things should be factored in for all these sources.
for sure. Because if they're not, we're not talking apples to apples. So you
Right.
know,
And right now it's not. Nuclear is held to this completely different standard than anything else, while meanwhile, producing so much electricity with so little carbon, it's and such a great safety record. To make this assertion that nuclear power does us no good until the waste is solved. No
yeah,
good.
Jesus,
It produces more than half of our carbon-free electricity. More than half.
that's no good, Xander.
That's no good. Okay. It
That's
provides
worthless.
grid stability
Nope,
on the East Coast and in Florida,
nope, not worth it.
in particular. Not worth it.
Yeah,
It
that
it,
when
it
he said that,
produces,
I was just floored. Like
yeah,
Jesus.
not worth it. You know, and yeah, and it's really interesting too. He interviews this Dan Hirsch guy, you know, you know, California guy against nuclear. Um, interviews. Sponsored by this Progressive Consultant Inc. Um, goes to the Northwest. He goes to all these areas where there's like hardly any nuclear power. When you talk to people East Coast, Florida, where there's good amounts of nuclear power, Southeast really, people who live near nuclear power like it more.
Hmm.
Which is interesting. So it's like, in California, everyone's like, man, just put up solar panels. It's great. It's like, okay, go to Chicago in the winter and ask people what they're gonna like. These
Yeah,
shit's not gonna do us any good.
right.
Like that's why these go to
Well, and
so it's
that brings
these
up a good point, and you mentioned it, but I think we should really point it out. We are not against quote unquote sustainable energy sources like wind and solar. Uh, I think it is important to, like we said, factor in the lifetime of that thing, and when your solar panels go dead, in 20 years, what's going to happen with them, and how are they going to
right.
be
Where do
recycled?
those go?
And you know what? Maybe if we're gonna be fair, maybe in 20 years we figure that out, like with nuclear and the reprocessing the fuel, yada yada. Okay, so maybe we figure it out, but we don't have those solutions right now, and we're decommissioning
So
these
they
things.
don't do us any good.
Yeah, exactly, Xander. They don't do us any good. So
Right.
if we were to use Bill Nye's logic, the only power source I would assume would be like geothermal, probably not even dams, hydroelectric,
No,
because
no,
that
yeah,
messes up the
hydroelectric still.
ecosystem.
Yeah, yeah.
So I honestly, it would be interesting to ask Bill where he thought the, I guess just all of our energy should come from, like currently.
Well, I think if he would, it can be all done with wind and solar and
That's
hydro and
totally wrong.
hydroelectric when possible. Yeah, I mean, I wish it were true. Like I really do because nuclear engineering's hard. Like
Well, see, I wish it
it's
were true if we could also recycle the stuff. Like, you
yeah,
know,
yeah, right. Yeah, I know, I mean, yeah, that's
yeah. So I guess
recycling and
we're
life cycle of all these things is something that is another topic just to get into
yeah,
at some
for
point.
sure. And so I guess take two. I'll say it more clear. We are not against quote unquote renewable energy sources like solar and wind, but to say that those sources can fully support our grid, support our economy, everything is totally disingenuous. It physically cannot happen right now, and it doesn't take into any consideration the different climates around the United States. It's a big old country. There's a bunch of different climates. Like solar is not going to work everywhere. Wind is not going to work everywhere. So I think it our point is in those type of places where the other renewable things are not feasible, or you have a large need, you like near a metropolitan area or something. Nuclear needs to be part of the equation. We're not saying it needs to be the whole equation, 100%, energy production from nuclear, but currently it is our best, least carbon emitting power source out there. People are very concerned about the amount of carbon in the atmosphere and in the environment. So if that is true, then we have the solution for the least carbon emitting power source right now. It's ready to go today. So,
Right.
to me it's just disingenuous to count nuclear out as not part of the equation.
Yeah. 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 I mean, it's frustrating, and he also, again with this like emotional appeal he has to at the end. He says,
Hmm.
Geniuses made nuclear power, but there are no geniuses working on this issue."
Oh, he says that? Jesus
He
Christ.
said, yeah, that's what he says.
Wow.
Yeah, which I guess I find personally more offensive because I know some extremely smart people who've thought a lot about this who are uh, I'm just gonna fucking say it, much smarter than Bill Nye,
Yeah,
much
for sure.
smarter in
Dude, my
every way,
cat's
more
smarter than Bill
articulate.
Nye. Fuck.
Well, he's not a stupid. I mean, he went to Cornell. I mean, he's not a stupid
Yeah,
guy.
I
But
guess.
I
I
know
guess
there are
he's just
people.
disingenuous then,
I guess he's just this.
which is worse,
Yeah,
right?
I don't know exactly. I'm sort of struck. You know,
Yeah, is he
I
incompetent or
lump
is he
in these.
nefarious?
Yeah, exactly. It's hard to say because I put these. So the people. This is just sort of my semi-anecdotal, um, qualitative, look at people who are on this side of anti-nuclear energy, especially people in California, where I'm from. They're against nuclear power. They're against genetically modified foods. Some of them, they're the same people who are against vaccines,
Oh God.
and this is sort of the same kind of population.
Right.
These are the um, these are the so it's sort of like it's hard. But these are also the same people who care about the environment, who care about the future,
Right.
and they're not stupid.
No,
Like
that's true.
really, like they're not stupid. So I don't. I I don't know what it is because I know people like, I mean, I don't know if we want to
I guess
keep this in
maybe.
here, but like my mom was,
Okay.
partially against vaccines. And she's not stupid. She's not the smartest person. Like she's not a genius, but she was like kind of against, like hesitant about vaccines because she heard someone like one particular scientist
Hmm.
come out and say like had these concerning things, and this kind of got brought up in certain social circles and
Particularly
touted
maybe in
again.
the Bay Area of California, let's say.
Right, Bay Area, California, the sort of narrative gets pushed, and that's I think why we're really focusing on Bill Nye because he pushes the same narrative towards nuclear power, this unscientific, biased thing that's in our minds very detrimental to society and the environment.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think we're not being nitpicky just to be nitpicky. Like we do actually care about this stuff. We're not just trying to be assholes and say fuck Bill Nye, the selective science guy.
Yeah.
Like we would like to. I would love to have a debate with Bill Nye about this. Not me personally. I
Oh
want you
yeah.
to go, but so I guess I'm volunteering Xander for a debate with Bill Nye if he's out there. But
No. Yeah.
yeah, you're fine with that, right? You don't have anything going on.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
um,
I mean,
but I think
it'd
it
be
would be
interesting. Yeah.
interesting to have a dialogue with somebody like that to ask those questions and just be like, okay, so you do care about the environment, but have you done the critical thinking necessary to really understand what that all means, and what might not make you feel so good, like having nuclear spent nuclear fuel out in the world, let's say, you're concerned about that. Well, if you actually go through and do the research and look into it, which again not everyone's going to be able to do, I understand that. Part of the reason we wanted to do this, you'll find that, oh wow, the storage solutions are actually quite robust. The recycling solutions are getting better. All these really positive things about that. So to me, when I was talking to Zaner about this way back in the day, I said it doesn't seem like nuclear has a really good spokesperson, and unfortunately it seems like the other side has a million of them. So
Right.
I don't know what the solution to that is, but that's just kind of my observation.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's all true. Yeah.
It's real, Julian.
Oops.
Oops. Okay, if you made it through that entire 2-hour episode with us, thank you very much. We hope you learned something. We hope you were at least a little bit entertained. And most of all, we hope that you'll stick with us as we continue to do this and get better at it, hopefully. That's the idea, anyway. And
Yeah. So I think, everyone has kind of heard us just ranting and hating on Bill Nye for a couple of hours now. And I hope a lot of it was very nitpicky, but at the same time, science is nitpicky, and people have spent hours and careers getting things right and wrong, and also admitting that they were wrong. So we would also I'd put this out here. If Bill, if you'd like to come and learn some nuclear science from myself and several, many other people up in the Seattle area, we are welcome to have a conversation with you. I think we could all learn a lot from each other, and I think the more conversations we can have, the better this will be. So yes, we're harsh in that we're going after Bill a little bit with what he said, but at the same time, these things are important, and they're important to myself and to Nick. So that's kind of where we're at. This is why I made the podcast. That's why we're excited to do it, and we look forward to doing some more. That's kind of all we have, and until next time, thanks everyone.